The whiteout screams across Anchorage, Alaska. The city is blind, but a K9 is not. A Siberian husky K9 named Koda slams against his cruiser door, forcing his grieving partner, Officer Ben, to stop in the middle of nowhere. He senses what the storm hides. A 7-year-old boy, Leo, sitting frozen on a sidewalk. His jacket is thin, his hands are blue, and his body is a final, desperate shield for the 1-year-old sister in his arms. Her lips are purple. Her breathing has almost stopped. They are running from a man named Jared. They are running from a locked door, a fresh cigarette burn, and the sound of their mother's muffled cries. What happens next will pull a father from his own frozen grief. This isn't just a rescue. It is the beginning of a family found in the heart of a storm. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. At 10 in the morning, Anchorage vanished. It wasn't the quiet descent of an evening snowfall. It was a whiteout, a violent, suffocating erasure of reality. The sky and the earth had merged into a single, depthless, churning wall of white. The wind didn't just howl. It was an abrasive shriek that scoured the air and drove snow horizontally, like billions of tiny needles. Visibility wasn't poor, it was non-existent. The city was paralyzed, locked down under a state of emergency. But the mandates of weather were one thing. The mandates of duty were another. Inside the rattling cocoon of Patrol Car 214, Officer Ben Carter steered more by memory than by sight. His knuckles were white on the wheel, his gaze fixed on the 2 feet of useless, swirling chaos illuminated by his headlights. Ben was 44, a man whose sharp features and trimmed salt-and-pepper beard looked as if they had been weathered by this very wind. His competence was etched in the professional set of his shoulders, but his Arctic blue eyes held a permanent shadow. This weather was a personal torment. It was a precise, agonizing echo of the storm that had swallowed his 5-year-old son, Liam, 5 years prior. Ben had been on duty that day too. The guilt was a physical weight, a cold spot in his gut that flared every time the wind screamed. He fought the memory, forcing his focus back to the present, to the invisible curb he was trying not to hit. His only partner in the specialized K9 passenger seat was Koda, a 4-year-old Siberian husky. Koda was not a standard-issue German shepherd. He was an Arctic specialist, a black-and-white search and rescue engine whose own icy blue eyes were a startling match for Ben's. His thick coat was impervious to the cold, but the animal was restless. He wasn't panting or pacing, he was vibrating, a low thrumming whine emanating from his chest that Ben could feel more than hear. Koda sensed the precipitous drop in barometric pressure, and perhaps the tension radiating from the man beside him. "Easy, boy," Ben murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Just a patrol." Koda's ears, however, remained pricked, swiveling independently, scanning a world Ben couldn't see. They were navigating a low-income neighborhood near Ship Creek, a maze of aging duplexes where the city plows hadn't dared to venture. The desolation was total. The world was silent, except for the shriek of the wind and the crunch of the cruiser's heavy-duty tires. It was a ghost world. Ben had just made the decision that this was futile, a dangerous waste of resources, and was reaching for the radio to report his intention to fall back to the main arteries. He never touched the mic. The shift was instantaneous. Koda exploded. One moment he was a tense statue, the next he was a frantic mass of fur and muscle, launching himself against the reinforced passenger door. The bark was not a warning. It was a percussive, desperate sound that Ben had only heard in live fine certification. Drills. Found. "Koda! Heel!" Ben slammed the brakes. The heavy vehicle fishtailed, the anti-lock brakes grabbing and releasing frantically on the packed ice before lurching to a stop. He threw the car into park, his heart hammering against his ribs. Wipers swiped uselessly at the wall of white. He squinted, straining to see what Koda saw. Nothing. There was nothing. Just the blinding, disorienting void. The wind howled, as if mocking him. But Koda was infallible. The husky was now clawing at the door panel, his sharp nails clicking on the hard plastic, his eyes locked on a spot 10 yards ahead. He let out another single commanding bark. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Here." Ben's hand slammed the door latch, his training overriding the paralyzing shock. The wind tore the heavy cruiser door from his grip, ripping it backward with a metallic shriek that was instantly swallowed by the storm's roar. The whiteout, wasn't just a visual phenomenon, it was a physical assault. The temperature drop felt like a 100-degree swing, a suffocating dry cold that instantly seared his lungs. He pulled his neoprene face mask up to his goggles as ice needles peppered every inch of exposed skin. "Coda, with me!" he yelled, but the husky was already gone, a black and white streak vanishing into the churning void, his frantic barking the only tether to reality. Ben unclipped his radio, pushing through the thigh-high drift that had already formed against his vehicle. "Dispatch, 214, he shouted over the wind. K9 has a positive alert. I am investigating on foot. Stand by." He followed the sound. It was the only way to navigate. The world was reduced to a 360-degree wall of white, and the abrasive sound of Coda's barking, which seemed to be coming from 20 yards ahead, near the vinyl-sided wall of a low-income apartment complex. Every step was a battle. The snow was powdery and deep, offering no purchase, and the wind hammered him with the force of a solid object. His mind flashed, unwanted and sharp, to another search, another small figure in the snow. Not again. Not this time, Liam. Please, God, not this time. He pushed the memory down, replaced by the adrenaline of the hunt. Then the barking changed. It stopped being a frantic alert and became a high-pitched, agonizing whine, the sound Coda made when he had located a victim and was begging Ben to intervene. Ben lunged forward, stumbling around the corner of the building, using the wall as a guide. "Coda, where are you, boy?" He wiped the ice from his goggles and saw him. Coda was digging furiously, not at a snowbank, but at a small hunched shape sitting upright against the building's foundation, nearly swallowed by a drift. It looked like a discarded pile of laundry, a smudge of dark color against the overwhelming white. Ben's heart stopped. He fell to his knees, his heavy tactical pants sinking into the snow, and his gloved hands brushed away the icy crust. It was a child. This was Leo. He was impossibly small, maybe 7 years old, and he was still conscious, his body locked in a violent, convulsive shiver. His face was a waxy, pale blue, streaked with frozen tears that had turned to ice on his cheeks. He wore a thin, unzipped nylon jacket over a faded t-shirt, soaked jeans, and worn-out sneakers, a pathetic defense against an Alaskan blizzard. He had no hat, no gloves. His chapped lips were cracked and tinged with blue. As Ben touched him, the boy's eyes fluttered open. They were a deep, terrified brown, and they held an agonizing awareness. He wasn't crying. He was far beyond that. He was simply enduring, a small, defiant flame flickering against an Arctic gale. Then Ben saw what the boy was protecting, held tight to his chest with a grip that even hypothermia hadn't broken. It was a bundle of pink blankets. Ben gently pried the boy's frozen arms apart, his own breath catching in his throat. Inside the bundle was a baby, a little girl. This was Maya. She was perhaps a year old, and she was in catastrophic distress. Her skin was not just pale, it was a terrifying, dusky purple. Her lips were a deep cyanotic blue. She wasn't shivering, she was limp, her body already past the point of fighting the cold. As Ben watched, her tiny chest hitched, and a faint, high-pitched sound escaped her. It was a stridor, the sound of a closing airway, of a body starving for oxygen. This wasn't just hypothermia, this was asphyxiation. The outline in his head, the one from the approved plan, screamed asthma. "Oh God," Ben whispered, the words ripped away by the wind. The professional in him took over, a cold, precise mechanism. He ripped his heavy outer gloves off, his bare hands instantly stinging in the sub-zero air. He needed to feel. He pressed 2 fingers to Maya's neck. The pulse was thready, terrifyingly fast. He pressed his fingers to Leo's. Slow, dangerously slow, hypothermia. "Help her," a voice whispered, so quiet it was almost imaginary. Ben looked at Leo. The boy's eyes were focused on him, pleading. "Maya, she can't breathe." Even now, frozen and dying, the boy's only thought was for his sister. This realization hit Ben harder than the wind. "I am, son. I'm helping," Ben said, his voice thick. He fumbled for his radio, pressing the transmit button. "Dispatch, 214. I have 2 pediatric victims. A 7-year-old male, severe hypothermia. A 1-year-old female, code blue, she's in respiratory arrest, possible anaphylaxis or severe asthma. I need a bus at my location now." The radio crackled. 214, be advised, no EMS vehicle can reach you. The roads are impassable, whiteout conditions. Ben swore, a sharp, bitter curse. He knew that. He was on his own. Copy that, dispatch. I am self-transporting. Notify Providence Hospital, pediatric trauma. I'm inbound. ETA, unknown. Tell them to be ready. He didn't wait for a reply. He ripped the thermal emergency blanket from the pouch on his belt and wrapped it tightly around Maya, trying to trap what little heat she had left. He turned to Leo. Son, I need you to stand. Leo just stared, his shivering slowing, a deadly sign. Okay, I got you. Ben scooped the tiny rigid form of Maya up in one arm, holding her against his chest plate. He then looped his other arm under Leo, lifting the boy against his hip. They weighed almost nothing. He carried them both, staggering back through the storm, following the deep tracks he had just made. Coda flanked him, a low growl in his chest, guarding their retreat from the storm itself. The 10 yards back to the cruiser felt like a mile. He ripped the back door open, tossed the radio onto the passenger seat, and gently placed both children on the bench, blasting the vehicle's heater to its maximum setting. Leo collapsed onto the seat, his teeth chattering. Maya hadn't moved. Ben jumped into the driver's seat, Coda leaping into the passenger side, turning to stare at the children, whining. Ben slammed the car in drive, hit the lights and sirens, a useless, symbolic gesture in the blinding noise, and mashed the accelerator, fishtailing wildly before the tires found purchase. He was driving blind, fueled by a single, desperate prayer and the chilling memory of the last time a child's life had depended on him in a storm. This time, he would not be too late. The world beyond the windshield was a theoretical concept. The sirens were a useless, thin wail, swallowed instantly by the shrieking vacuum of the storm. Ben was driving blind, fighting a 100-pound vehicle that wanted to skate on the packed ice. He wasn't navigating streets, he was navigating his own memory of them, making turns based on a half-remembered mailbox or the faint shadow of a building he could only feel, not see. Beside him, Coda was rigid, whining low in his throat, his ice-blue eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, watching the small, still forms in the back seat. Ben's professionalism was a suit of armor, but he could feel the ice of his own past creeping underneath it. This was Liam's storm. This was the same blinding white, the same feeling of absolute helplessness, the same desperate race against a clock he couldn't see. But this time, he wasn't coordinating a search. He was the search. He would not fail. Maya, he heard a tiny voice whisper. He glanced in the mirror. Leo was conscious, his body racked with tremors, but he had managed to pull his frozen hand free and was trying to touch his sister's face. She's not shaking, Leo whispered, the terror in his voice sharper than the cold. Ben's blood ran cold. He knew what that meant. Leo was in the violent, shivering stage of hypothermia, the body's desperate, energy-burning fight to stay alive. Maya's stillness meant her body had given up. She was shutting down. "Hold on, son. Just hold on." Ben slammed his palm on the radio transmitter. "Dispatch, 214. I am 2 blocks out from Providence ER, northbound on Lake Otis. Have that pediatric trauma team on the curb. I am not stopping. I will be driving through the ambulance bay doors if they are not open." He didn't wait for a reply. He saw the faint, hazy glow of the hospital lights, a beacon in the void. He spun the wheel, fishtailing the cruiser onto the emergency ramp, laying on the horn. The bay doors miraculously rolled open. He didn't just stop. He skidded sideways, the cruiser's bumper striking the concrete pylon with a dull thud. Before the car had fully stopped, the ER doors burst open. This was their territory. Outlined against the sterile yellow light was the trauma team, already gowned. Ben ripped his door open and was in the back seat, unbuckling the children. He emerged, a whirlwind of snow and desperation. Maya held tight to his chest, Leo clinging to his back. "I need a doctor, now!" "Here!" A man stepped forward, not in a coat, but in blue scrubs, his arms already bare to the elements, unflinching. This was Dr. Eris Thorne, the night shift lead who had been trapped at the hospital by the storm and was now running his 20th consecutive hour. He was a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s, with a face all sharp angles and a shock of unkempt gray hair. His intelligent, exhausted eyes took in the scene with a terrifying, assessing calm. "What do we have, officer?" 1-year-old female, profound hypothermia in respiratory arrest. Suspect severe asthma exacerbation. She has stridor, Ben recited, the words tumbling out. 7-year-old male, severe hypothermia, responsive but declining. Got it. Dr. Thorne took Maya from Ben's arms with practiced, gentle hands. Chloe, PEDS crash cart in Trauma 1. Get me a BVM and pre-charge the pediatric paddles. I want inhaled albuterol and epinephrine, now. A nurse, Chloe Davis, was already in motion. She was the opposite of Thorne, compact, energetic, probably in her mid-30s, with fiery red hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her face taut. She was all efficiency, grabbing a gurney. Sir, put the boy here, she commanded Ben. He gently placed Leo on the stretcher. Another nurse immediately began wheeling him inside, Coda barking once from the car, a sound of profound distress at the separation. I need you, officer, Chloe said, looking at Ben. We need to know what we're dealing with. Ben followed them through the automatic doors, the sudden warmth and light of the ER feeling like a physical blow. They burst into Trauma Bay 1. It was a blur of motion. No pulse, doctor, someone yelled. She's in VFib. Thorne, already starting compressions on Maya's tiny chest, didn't look up. Charging, clear. The tiny body jumped. Still no pulse. Again. The scene blurred for Ben. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Chloe. Officer Carter, they've got her. We need to handle your other victim. Come with me. She pulled him into the adjacent bay, where Leo lay shivering on a gurney, his skin a mottled waxy gray. We need these wet clothes off him. We're starting active rewarming. Chloe picked up a pair of trauma shears and, with practiced speed, began cutting the soaked, frozen t-shirt up the middle. Leo, my name is Chloe. We're going to get you warm, okay? Leo just shivered, his eyes wide with terror, darting from Chloe's face to Ben's. As the shirt fell away, Chloe stopped. Ben stopped. The air left the room. The mottled pattern of hypothermia on Leo's chest was broken by a different, more horrifying topography of injury. There were bruises, ugly and distinct, in shades of greenish yellow and deep, angry purple, circling his ribs. And on his left shoulder, there was something else. A perfectly round, puckered scar, white at the edges and an angry raw pink in the center. It was new. It was a cigarette burn. Ben's vision tunneled. The roaring in his ears wasn't the storm anymore. It was rage. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragedy of the weather. This was a crime. He dropped to one knee, bringing his face level with Leo's, forcing his voice to be impossibly calm. Leo, he said softly, the name catching in his throat. Son, who did this to you? Leo's eyes filled with tears, which immediately froze on his eyelashes. He shivered, his gaze flicking to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. He looked at Chloe, then back at Ben's beard, his blue uniform, the badge. He leaned forward, a motion that must have cost him all his remaining strength, and whispered, the words a tiny puff of steam. Jared, he gets mad. Ben's blood, which had been racing with adrenaline, turned to absolute ice. Jared, is Jared at home with your mom? Leo nodded, a single jerky motion. He threw the breather, in the snow. A sob escaped him. He locked Mommy in the room. Leo's words hung in the sterile air, sharper than the ice outside. He locked Mommy in the room. The phrase detonated in Ben's mind, instantly connecting the cigarette burn on the boy's shoulder, the bruises, and the baby's desperate, oxygen-starved state. This wasn't a tragic accident caused by a blizzard. This was an attempted murder. Ben's professionalism, the calm, methodical training, was instantly consumed by a pure Arctic cold rage. He wasn't just an officer responding to a call. He was a barrier standing between a monster and his prey. He looked at Nurse Chloe, whose face had gone pale, her eyes wide with the same dawning horror. Keep him safe, Ben commanded, his voice a low growl he barely recognized. He's a material witness. Do not let anyone who is not hospital staff near him until I get back. Do you understand me? Chloe, shocked out of her professional efficiency, just nodded, her hand instinctively resting on Leo's uninjured shoulder. Ben didn't run. He moved with a heavy, controlled, and lethal purpose. He strode back into the main ER corridor, ignoring the organized chaos, his hand already on his shoulder mic. He shoved through the automatic doors. The whoosh of the mechanism is a prelude to the violent wall of wind that hit him. The whiteout was still at its peak, a blinding, screaming void. He didn't feel the cold. "Dispatch, 214, he roared into the mic, his voice cutting through the storm. "I have a confirmed hostage situation. Domestic violence escalating to felony assault, unlawful imprisonment, and aggravated assault on a minor. The suspect, Jared, is at the last known address. I believe the mother of the children is his hostage. She is barricaded and injured. I need backup. Priority 1. The suspect is to be considered armed and extremely violent." He didn't wait for the acknowledgement. He ripped the cruiser door open. Coda, who had been staring with frantic intensity at the hospital entrance, barked once, sensing the violent shift in Ben's demeanor. The calm rescuer was gone, replaced by the hunter. "Coda, the period, forward," Ben snapped. "We're going back." The drive, which had been a desperate race against nature, was now a hunt. The storm was no longer just an obstacle, it was cover for the enemy. Ben drove faster this time, his knuckles white, the heavy-duty tires fighting for grip on the invisible, ice-slicked road. The memory of Liam was no longer a weight of grief. It was fuel. It was the screaming, internal promise of never again. The wail of the wind was indistinguishable from the rage roaring in his own ears. He skidded to a stop in front of the apartment complex, parking diagonally to block the driveway, using the vehicle as a barrier. Through the swirling snow, another set of flashing blue and reds appeared, pulling up behind him. The door of the second cruiser opened, and Officer Mark Rigg emerged, a man built like a refrigerator, 10 years younger than Ben, with a thick neck and a face that was usually set in a jovial, easygoing expression. Rigg was a good cop, solid, by the book, and strong as an ox, but his face now was all business. "Ben, what the hell is going on? Dispatch said hostages," Rigg shouted over the wind. "The kids are at Providence," Ben yelled back, moving to the trunk and unclipping his tactical shotgun. "Maya's in respiratory arrest. Leo's covered in burns. The suspect, Jared, is in 2B. He's got their mother." Rigg's jaw tightened, and he wordlessly unholstered his own sidearm. "Got it. On you, Ben." They took the exterior stairs, Coda leading, silent and low to the ground. The apartment door, 2B, was just as Leo had left it. As they got closer, they heard it, the obscene sound of a television, blaring a canned sitcom laugh track that spilled out into the frozen, desperate air. Ben motioned for Rigg to hold. He put his ear to the thin, cheap wood. Over the sound of the idiotic TV, he heard something else. A faint thump, and then a whimper, quickly muffled. That was it. He didn't knock. "APD! Open the door!" he roared, simultaneously kicking the door just beside the knob. The cheap pine frame splintered instantly. The door flew open, slamming against the inside wall. "Coda, poshly!" The room was a disaster, a dark, squalid hole that reeked of stale whiskey, body odor, and cigarette smoke. In the center of the room, lit by the flickering blue light of the television, a large man was struggling to get out of a recliner. This was Jared. He was in his late 30s, a man gone to seed. He had the soft, puffy bulk of a heavy drinker, his pale, doughy face covered in a patchy, greasy beard. His lank, dark hair was matted to his head. He wore a stained wife-beater and plaid pajama pants. His small, dull eyes widened in drunken confusion, then narrowed in belligerent rage. "What the hell is this? You can't just break—" He never finished. Coda, a black and white blur of fur and muscle, had cleared the threshold and launched himself. The husky didn't go for an arm. He went center mass, hitting Jared in the chest with 90 pounds of focused canine fury. Jared went over backward, the recliner tipping as he crashed to the floor. Coda was on him, his jaws clamped around the man's thick forearm, a deep thoracic growl vibrating through the room as Jared shrieked in pain and terror. "Police! Show me your hands! Show me your hands!" Rigg bellowed, his firearm trained on the writhing man on the floor. Ben didn't stop. He was a shark, moving past the threat, his shotgun pointed at the floor, but ready. He locked Mommy in the room. He saw the door at the end of the short, filthy hallway. It was closed. He kicked it, locked. He didn't waste time. He stepped back, raised his boot, and slammed his heel into the lock plate. The frame shattered. The door flew open. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. And it was freezing. The window was wide open, snow blowing in and dusting the floor. In the far corner, huddled against the wall, was a small, frail figure. This was Serena. She looked like a ghost, a woman who had given up. She couldn't have been more than 30, but the abuse had aged her into a hollow-eyed woman of 50. Her hair, a matted, dishwater blonde, clung to her bruised and swollen face. One eye was completely sealed shut with purple bruising. Her lip was split and dried with blood. She was wearing only a thin, torn nightgown in the sub-zero room. Her hands were bound behind her back with a zip tie, and her mouth was covered with a thick, brutal layer of silver duct tape. As Ben's large, uniformed frame filled the doorway, she didn't cry out. She didn't look relieved. She just squeezed her eyes shut and made a single, terrified animal sound, bracing herself for the next blow. Ben's rage instantly evaporated, replaced by a profound, agonizing wave of sadness. He lowered the shotgun. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick. "My name is Officer Carter. I'm with the APD. You're safe now." He moved slowly, deliberately, and knelt in the snow piling on the floor in front of her. He gently reached out and, with an impossibly steady hand, took the corner of the duct tape and began to pull it away from her face. Serena's entire body flinched violently as Ben's fingers, impossibly gentle for such a large man, touched the corner of the duct tape. He spoke again, his voice a low rumble, trying to cut through the terror that radiated from her in palpable waves. "Ma'am, Serena, my name is Officer Ben Carter. You are safe. The man who did this is in custody. I am going to remove this tape. It might hurt." She didn't nod. She just squeezed her eyes shut, her bound body tensing, bracing for the inevitable pain she had been conditioned to expect. He worked slowly, holding her jaw with one hand to stabilize her skin, and peeled the thick silver tape back with the other. It made a sickening, ripping sound. When it came free, it took a layer of skin from her already split lip. She didn't scream. She just gasped, a desperate, broken intake of frozen air that turned into a hacking, agonizing cough. The cold air hit her raw throat, and she choked, her body convulsing. Ben immediately reached for his canteen, but the water inside was frozen solid. "It's okay," he said, the words feeling stupid and small. He pulled his tactical knife and, with surgical precision, slid the blade under the thick plastic zip tie that bound her wrists. It snapped, and her hands, a mottled blue and purple, fell limply to her lap. "Suspect secured!" Riggs' voice boomed from the living room, a sharp counterpoint to the fragile silence of the bedroom. "He's cuffed! Coda! Stoyat! Stay!" There was a crash of furniture, followed by Jared's drunken, belligerent roar. "You pigs! You think this is over? That's my property! You're dead! You hear me? Dead!" Ben ignored it. He was focused only on the woman in front of him. He quickly shed his own heavy insulated patrol jacket, the outer shell that kept him alive in the whiteout, and wrapped it around Serena's frail shoulders. She was impossibly light, like a bird, and her shivering was so violent that her teeth chattered audibly, the sound echoing in the tiny frozen room. "Serena, we have to go," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Your children are at the hospital. They are alive. They are waiting for you." The word children was the key. It was the first thing that seemed to register, cutting through the fog of her shock. Her one good eye opened, focusing on his face for the first time, not with terror, but with a desperate, questioning plea. "Leo?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, cracking on the name. "Maya?" "They're safe," Ben said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Maya is very sick, but the doctors are working on her. Leo is a hero. He saved you all. Now let me save you." He saw her try to move her legs, to stand, but she cried out, a sharp piercing sound, and clutched her side. Broken ribs. He didn't ask. He simply slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as easily as he had lifted her son. She weighed nothing. As he lifted her, she instinctively buried her bruised and swollen face into the fleece lining of his jacket, hiding from a world that had only offered her pain. Ben moved out of the bedroom, his shotgun now dangling uselessly from its sling. As he entered the living room, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Rig had Jared hauled up from the floor, one arm twisted behind his back, Coda standing 3 feet away, teeth bared, a low, menacing growl rumbling in his chest, ready to re-engage if the suspect so much as twitched. Jared's drunken arrogance had faded, replaced by a sullen, murderous rage. As Ben walked past carrying Serena, Jared's eyes locked onto her. "You bitch!" he spat, lunging forward, his movement instantly checked by Riggs' iron grip and Coda's threatening advance. "You did this. You called them. When I get out, I'll find you. I'll find you and those brats, and I'll—" "Rig, get him out of here," Ben commanded, his voice lethally quiet. He didn't look at Jared. He just kept walking, shielding Serena from the man's venom. "With pleasure," Rig grunted, shoving the much larger man toward the shattered doorway. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." He dragged Jared out onto the landing and down the stairs, his voice fading, as he read him his Miranda rights, the words punctuated by Jared's curses and the howling of the storm. Ben was alone with Serena and Coda. "Coda, Raya Dom, heal," he said. The husky immediately fell into step beside him, a sentient, ice-eyed guardian. Ben carried Serena down the treacherous, snow-covered stairs. She was light, but the wind was a living thing, trying to rip her from his arms. He shielded her with his own body, his back taking the brunt of the stinging horizontal snow. He reached the rear door of his cruiser, the same one where he had placed her children, what felt like a lifetime ago. He gently settled her onto the bench seat. She immediately curled into a fetal position, her hands, now free, clutching his jacket around her, her body still shaking with a violence that seemed impossible for her frail frame. He slammed the door, ran to the driver's side, and jumped in, Coda leaping into the passenger seat, his fur already caked with ice. The heater was still blasting. Ben ripped his radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, 214. Suspect is in custody, 1015 with 218. I have the female victim, 1098. She is suffering from severe hypothermia, blunt force trauma, and broken ribs. I am self-transporting back to Providence. I need DVU and social services to meet me there. ASAP. Have Dr. Thorne standing by. She's in bad shape." The drive back was a different kind of race. The first trip had been a panic, a desperate plea against time and nature. This trip was a grim, silent procession. The only sounds in the car were the screaming wind, the drone of the heater, and Serena's quiet, agonizing, rasping sobs. It wasn't the sound of grief, it was the sound of pain, of shock, and of a terror so deep it had become a part of her. Ben glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw her reflection, a broken, bruised woman huddled in his jacket, and his heart ached. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He just drove, his hands steady on the wheel. He'd seen this before. The rescue was the easy part. The war was just beginning. As he pulled the cruiser up the emergency ramp for the second time that day, the bay doors were already opening. Through the swirling snow, he could see the shapes of Dr. Thorne and Nurse Chloe, their faces grim, waiting with a gurney. The rescue was over. The healing was about to begin. The emergency bay doors slid shut, cutting off the howl of the white out with a pneumatic sigh, replacing it with the controlled, fluorescent chaos of the trauma center. Dr. Thorne was already in motion, his gaunt frame belying a fierce energy as he and Chloe transferred Serena from Ben's arms to the gurney. "Get her in Bay 2, now!" Thorne commanded, his voice sharp. "I want her on a cardiac monitor. Start 2 large-bore IVs with warmed saline and get that bear hugger blanket on her. Full set of trauma labs, X-ray for those ribs, and get ortho paged. She's in hypothermic shock." Serena, wrapped in Ben's heavy jacket, was conscious, but her eyes were wide, with a terror that went beyond the cold. She looked like a cornered animal. As they began to wheel her away, her frozen blue-tinged hand shot out, grabbing Ben's arm with a desperate, surprising strength. "No, please," she rasped, her voice cracking. "My children, where—" "They're here," Ben said, his voice dropping low, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "They are safe. Leo is in the next room. Maya is with the pediatric team. These people are going to help you, Serena. You have to let them." She searched his face, the one good eye frantic, looking for the lie. Finding none, her grip loosened, and she allowed them to push her through the curtains. Ben was left standing in the corridor, a sudden, useless island in the stream of medical staff. The adrenaline that had fueled him for the last hour began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold, wet chill of his own sweat. He was still just in his uniform shirt, his jacket now warming Serena. Coda, who had been ordered to wait, was sitting by the main sliding doors, a picture of disciplined patience. his ice blue eyes tracking Ben's every move. Ben started toward him, needing to report, to file, to do something procedural, when a new voice cut through the air. "Officer Carter?" The man who approached was not a doctor. He was the antithesis of the ER's frantic energy. He was in his late 50s, with a rumpled tweed blazer that looked like it had been slept in, a cheap coffee-stained tie pulled loose, and glasses perched low on his nose. This was Detective Al Corris of the Domestic Violence Unit. He had the gray, exhausted complexion of a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity so many times it no longer surprised him. "Detective Karras," the man said, flipping open a small, worn notepad. "Riggs' call woke me up. Hell of a morning to be playing hero, Carter." "Not a hero," Ben said, his voice flat. "The suspect, Jared Haynes, is in custody. Riggs transporting him." "Yeah, I heard," Karras sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Haynes, he's got a sheet. Assault, disorderly, a couple of restraining orders he violated. Nothing that stuck. Looks like his luck just ran out. I'll need your full statement, but first, the victims. The boy, Leo, and the baby, Maya. How are they?" Before Ben could answer, Chloe, the red-haired nurse, emerged from Trauma Bay 1, her face grim. "The baby's stable," she said, speaking to Ben but loud enough for Karras to hear. "Dr. Thorne got her intubated. Severe asthma attack, complicated by the hypothermia. She was in VFib, but they got her back. She's on her way to the PICU. She's a fighter." Ben closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, the knot in his chest loosening. Alive. Chloe then turned to him. "The mother, Serena, is asking for you. And for Leo. We've got him warmed up, and I've cleaned that burn. He's terrified, but he's tough." Karras snapped his notepad shut. "The reunion. Right. Let's see what we've got." Chloe led them to a pediatric room down the hall. Leo was sitting up in a small bed, swallowed by a large hospital gown. The waxy blue tint was gone from his skin, replaced by the blotchy red of rapid rewarming. He was wrapped in a heated blanket, and a small, cartoon-bandaged IV line was taped to his hand, but his eyes were the same, huge, dark, and filled with a silent, waiting terror. A moment later, 2 orderlies wheeled Serena's gurney into the room. Her face had been gently cleaned, revealing the true, heartbreaking extent of the bruising. Her ribs were tightly wrapped, and a warm IV line was feeding into her arm, but she was alert. Their eyes met across the small room. It wasn't a loud reunion. It was a silent, shattered explosion. "Leo," Serena breathed, the name a prayer. She tried to sit up, but gasped in pain, clutching her side. "Mommy!" Leo's voice was tiny. He looked at her face, at the bruises, and his own face crumpled. He hurt you." "I'm okay, baby," she whispered, her one good eye filling with tears. "I'm okay. Are you?" He just nodded, and she held out her hand. Leo scrambled off the bed, ignoring the IV pole, and climbed onto the side of her gurney. He didn't hug her, he couldn't, because of her ribs, but he just clutched her hand, his small fingers gripping hers, and laid his head on the pillow beside hers. For a full minute, they just breathed, a mother and son, 2 survivors, tethered together in a sea of sterile white. Ben and Karras stood in the doorway, 2 silent, uniformed witnesses to a moment so private it felt like an intrusion. Karras cleared his throat, his professional cynicism visibly softened. Ben just watched. He saw Leo's head turn, his small, dark eyes finding Ben in the doorway. The boy's gaze held a question, a deep, fundamental question that no doctor or detective could answer. He wasn't asking about his injuries or his mother's. He was asking if the monster was gone for good. "Officer Ben?" Leo's voice was barely audible. Serena tensed, hearing the fear in her son's voice. Is Jared coming back?" The name hung in the air, a toxic physical presence. Serena flinched, her eyes squeezing shut, the terror returning. Ben stepped forward, moving past Karras. He walked to the gurney and knelt, a deliberate, grounding motion that brought his ice-blue eyes level with Leo's. He put his large, calloused hand over the boy's, covering his and Serena's joined hands. "Leo," he said, his voice low, steady, and absolute. "You look at me. And you look at me too, Serena." She opened her one eye. "That man is in a steel cage. He is not coming back. He will never touch you again. He will never touch Maya again. I am giving you my word, As an officer and as a man, I will personally see to it." It was an oath. It was a promise forged in the ice of his own loss. He saw the terror in Leo's eyes not just fade, but break. The boy stared at him, truly seeing him, and then a single shuddering cope of pure, unadulterated relief escaped him. He nodded. Serena, hearing the finality in Ben's voice, finally let go. The silent, stoic mask she had worn for her son dissolved, and she began to cry. Not the whimpering sobs of before, but the deep, agonizing, healing sobs of release. Ben stood up, gave Leo's shoulder a final squeeze, and quietly backed out of the room, leaving them. He and Karis walked back toward the ER entrance. Coda stood, his tail giving a single thump. "That's a hell of a promise to make, Carter," Karis said quietly, pulling out a cigarette he didn't light. "You can't guarantee what a judge will do." "He won't get to a judge," Ben said, his voice flat. "The charges? Attempted murder on the baby, felony assault and unlawful imprisonment on the mother, aggravated assault on the boy. He's not getting bail, he's not getting out. I'll be at every hearing. He's done." Karis looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the iron beneath the uniform. He nodded. "All right, let's get that statement." Ben walked to the automatic doors of the ER, Coda falling into step beside him. He looked out through the glass. The whiteout had broken. The wind still battered the building, but the snow had lightened to a dense, swirling flurry. He could see the faint, dark outline of the building across the street. The world was slowly, painstakingly returning. He put his hand on Coda's head, and the husky leaned against his leg. The ice inside Ben, the permanent 5-year winter of his grief for Liam, had not vanished. It was still there. It would always be there. But as he stood in the warmth of the hospital, listening to the distant, healing sobs of the family he had saved, he felt something he thought was lost forever. He felt the thaw. He had been too late for his own son. But by God, he had not been too late for this one. 2 weeks passed. The whiteout was a memory, a traumatic event the city was still digging out from. The snowplows had carved brown, slushy canyons through the streets of Anchorage, and a brittle, cold sun shone weakly, offering light but no warmth. For Serena, Leo, and Maya, the storm had simply moved indoors. They were safe, relocated to a state-funded domestic violence shelter on the other side of the city. It was a clean, anonymous building, with cinder-block walls painted a pale, lifeless green, reinforced doors, and a strict visitation policy. It was a fortress, but it felt like a prison. Maya, fully recovered from her respiratory crisis, was finally sleeping in a clean crib. Leo, however, was not. The nightmares came every night, a frantic, suffocating replay of Jared's rage, the locked door, and the suffocating snow. He would wake up screaming, his small body rigid, his eyes wide with a terror that the pale green walls couldn't keep out. Their only visitor was Ben. He had made a habit of stopping by at the end of his shift, often still in his uniform, Coda sitting patiently in the cruiser. But today, he was off duty. He wore a simple gray Henley jeans, an outfit that seemed to subtract the armor of his profession, revealing the tired, worried man underneath. He had brought Coda inside, a special exception negotiated with the shelter's director, Maria Sanchez. Maria was a short, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with intelligent, wary eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had seen hundreds of women like Serena, and she trusted no one, especially men and especially cops. But she had seen the way Leo reacted to the husky. "10 minutes, officer," she said, her arms crossed, not unkindly. "The dog is good for him, but don't make promises you can't keep. The system isn't your personal crusade." Ben just nodded, understanding her cynicism. He found Leo in the shelter's small, fluorescent-lit common room, sitting at a plastic table, listlessly pushing a crayon across a piece of paper. "Hey, champ," Ben said quietly. Leo's head snapped up, his dark, haunted eyes landing on Coda. The change was instantaneous. The terror receded, replaced by a spark of pure, unadulterated joy. "Coda," he whispered. The husky, sensing the boy's fragility, didn't jump. He walked forward, his tail giving a low, steady thump, and pushed his head gently under Leo's small hand. Leo buried his face in the dog's thick, black and white fur, his small fingers gripping the ruff. "Is he staying?" "For a little while," Ben said, sitting down at the small table. He saw Leo's drawing. It wasn't a house or a sun. It was a scribble of black and red. a dark shape with angry small eyes. Jared. Serena emerged from the hallway, holding Maya on her hip. She looked better. The bruises on her face had faded from a violent purple to a sickly yellowish green, but they were fading. Her split lip had healed. She was wearing clean, donated clothes. But the fear in her one good eye had not faded. It was a permanent, watchful presence. "Officer," she said, her voice still quiet, but stronger. "Ben," he corrected her gently. "Please, call me Ben." He looked at Maya, who was watching him with bright, curious eyes, her breathing even and clear. "She looks 1,000 times better, Serena. The doctor said, they said 10 more minutes, and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She just clutched Maya tighter. "Thank you. Thank you it's not a big enough word." "You don't need to thank me," Ben said. "How are you? How's Leo?" Serena's gaze hardened. "He doesn't sleep. He won't let me turn the lights off. He just waits. We're just waiting for Jared." "Jared is in jail, Serena. He has no bail. Karis and I made sure the judge saw the photos of you, of Leo's burn. He's not getting out." Ben said the words with a confidence he desperately wanted to be true. He was a cop. He believed in the system he served. But even as he said it, his service phone, which he kept on him, even off duty, began to buzz. He glanced at the screen. Date. Karis. A cold dread settled in his stomach. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the hall. "Yeah, Al. What's up?" Karis's voice was a tired, gravelly sigh over the line. "You're not gonna like this, Ben. Jared's lawyer just worked some magic. He argued the kids were never in direct danger from Haynes, that it was neglect, not attempted murder. Argued the whiteout was the real culprit. He said Serena was a willing participant until she got scared." "That's bullshit, Al." Ben's voice was a low snarl. "I saw her. She was tied up, beaten, and left to freeze." I know, Karis said, his voice heavy with the bureaucracy Ben hated. But the lawyer put doubt in the judge's mind. Long story short, the attempted murder charge on the baby was dropped to felony endangerment. The judge reduced his bail. Ben's blood went cold. How reduced? He made it. Haynes has been out on bond for 2 hours. He's got a temporary restraining order on him. He's not supposed to go within 500 yards of the shelter, not supposed to contact them in any way. But Ben, he's out. Ben closed his eyes, his free hand clenching into a fist so tight his knuckles cracked. He heard Maria Sanchez's voice in his head. "Don't make promises you can't keep." His own words echoed back at him. "He will never touch you again. I will personally see to it." He felt a wave of pure, unadulterated fury at the system, at the lawyers, at the judge, at a world that could see a cigarette burn on a child and still talk about reduced bail. "Ben?" Karis's voice was cautious. "You there?" "I'm here," Ben said, his voice flat and dead. "Thanks for the heads up." He hung up, his mind racing. He was no longer off duty. He was on watch. He walked back into the common room. Serena saw his face and knew, instantly. A mother who has lived in terror recognizes its shadow. "What?" she whispered, her hand instinctively pulling Maya closer. "What is it?" "Serena, Ben began, but he couldn't lie to her. "Jared, his lawyer, he made bail. He's out." The color drained from Serena's face. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went utterly, terrifyingly still, her eyes wide, her breathing shallow. It was the same look she'd had in the frozen bedroom. "No," she whispered. No, he can't be. He'll find us. He said he would find us." "Mommy?" Leo had stood up, his hands still on Coda's fur, his eyes darting between his mother's terrified face and Ben's grim one. "Is the monster coming?" Ben knelt, pulling the boy into a one-armed hug. "No," he said, his voice an iron promise. "He is not. I'm staying. I'll be right outside." "Maria!" he called. Maria Sanchez was there in an instant, her face dark. "He's out," Ben said. "He's on the street. I want this building on lockdown. Full protocol." Maria nodded, her professionalism kicking in, and she immediately went to the phone. Ben looked back at Serena. "He can't get in here, and he won't get near you. I'm going to be in my car, right at the gate, all night." "You can't," Serena whispered, tears finally welling. "You have a job, a life." "This is my job," he said. He looked at Coda, who was now sitting, his head on Leo's lap, a silent, furry guardian. Coda, guard. The husky looked up at Ben, then at Leo, and let out a soft whine, understanding the command. He lay down at Leo's feet, his gaze fixed on the door. He'll stay with you tonight, Ben said to a stunned Leo. He's the best partner I've got. He'll keep you safe until I'm back in the morning. He gave Coda's head one last rub, stood up, and walked out, his face a mask of cold resolve. He spent the next 8 hours parked in his personal truck, across from the shelter's gated entrance. The night was cold and clear. The city was quiet. He drank stale coffee and watched, and just after 3 a.m., his vigilance was rewarded. A beat-up dark green sedan with a noisy muffler and one headlight out drove by. It slowed as it passed the shelter, the driver's window down in the freezing air. Ben couldn't see the face, just the silhouette of a large man and the red glow of a cigarette. The car didn't stop. It just slowed, a predator testing the fences. Then it sped up and disappeared around the corner. The restraining order was for 500 yards. The car had been at 510. He couldn't be touched, but Ben knew. He wasn't just out, he was hunting. The taillight of the green sedan disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, a lingering red smear against the blue-black of the Alaskan night. Ben Carter did not move. He just sat, his truck's engine a low, idling rumble, his coffee long since turned to a cold, bitter sludge. The 3 a.m. sighting of Jared Haynes was not a violation of any court order. It was a message. It was a promise. It was a predator circling, testing the strength of the fence. Ben knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who had hunted other men, that the 500-yard restraining order was nothing but a piece of paper. It was a suggestion, not a barrier. He picked up his phone, not calling Karis. It was too late for bureaucracy, but his own shift sergeant. "Mark, it's Ben," he said, his voice low and awake. "I'm at the downtown shelter. I have a 1097, suspect from my DV case is in the area. I'm sitting on the location. I need a marked unit to patrol the perimeter, high visibility, every 15 minutes. And I need you to pull Haynes's file. I want to know every associate, every known address, every bar he drinks at. He's out, and he's already hunting." He listened for a moment. "Yeah, that's the one, thanks." He spent the rest of the night in that truck, a cold, vigilant statue. When the first weak gray light of dawn broke over the snow-covered roofs, he saw the shelter door open. Maria Sanchez emerged holding a leash. Coda trotted out, his tail high, and immediately ran to Ben's truck, pressing his cold nose to the window. Ben got out, stretching his stiff, cramped muscles, the cold air biting his face. "Hey, boy," he murmured, rubbing the husky's head. "Good guard duty." Maria approached, her arms crossed, her face tired but resolute. "He was a perfect gentleman," she said, nodding at Coda. "Leo slept for 6 straight hours, the first time since he got here. He held on to that dog's fur like a life raft. You can't keep doing this, officer. You can't sit here all night." "He was here," Ben said simply. 3 a.m., dark green sedan. Maria's face went pale. "Damn him. Damn the system that let him out. What do we do?" "We fight," Ben said. "The trial is in 2 weeks. Karis got it expedited. Until then, you have a 24/7 patrol car on this block, and I'll be here every night." The next 2 weeks were a suffocating, low-grade war of nerves. Ben worked his shifts, and then he slept for a few hours in his truck in the shelter parking lot, Coda a silent presence beside him. He became a fixture, a guardian in a flannel shirt and jeans, a silent promise to Leo and Serena that the monster would not get through the gate. Jared's car was seen twice more, always in the early hours, always just outside the legal limit. He was a shark, and he was patient. Then, the day of the trial arrived. It wasn't a whiteout day. It was a painfully bright, cold spring morning. The courtroom was small, beige, and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Serena sat behind the prosecutor's table. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wore a simple donated blue dress, her faded blonde hair pulled back. The bruises had faded, but the hollow-eyed, haunted look remained. Jared Haynes sat at the defense table, smirking. He was clean, his greasy hair combed back, his puffy face set in an arrogant, bored expression. He looked at Serena, a look of such possessive, venomous contempt that she physically recoiled, sinking into her chair. Ben sat in the front row, directly behind Serena, in his full Class A dress uniform. He had requested to bring Coda, not as a K9, but as a therapeutic support animal for the child witness. After a long argument, the judge had agreed. The husky lay at Ben's feet, his gaze fixed on Leo. The trial was a brutal, clinical dissection of pain. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman, presented the photos of Serena's beaten face, the x-rays of her broken ribs, the close-up of the perfectly round, puckered cigarette burn on Leo's shoulder. Jared's lawyer was slick, arguing that the burn was an unfortunate accident, and that Serena's injuries were the result of a tumultuous, passionate relationship. It was Leo's word against Jared's. The prosecution calls Leo Carter, the bailiff said. There was a typo on the witness list. Serena had legally changed her and her children's last names to Carter, a secret act of defiance and hope. Leo, dressed in a small new suit, his dark eyes huge, walked to the stand. He looked tiny, a child lost in a sea of adult ritual. He was sworn in, his voice a barely audible squeak. Leo, the prosecutor began gently, do you know the man sitting over there? Leo's gaze flickered to Jared. He flinched, his whole body tensing. He nodded, looking down. Yes. Can you tell the court his name? Jared, he whispered. Now, Leo, the defense attorney began on cross-examination, you were scared that day, weren't you? It was a big storm. You were cold. It's easy to get confused when you're cold, isn't it? Leo just nodded. And this burn, your mom's friend, Jared, he didn't mean to hurt you, did he? It was an accident. You fell against his cigarette, isn't that right? Leo looked at the lawyer, his small face pale. He said nothing. Jared was staring at him, a tiny menacing smile on his face. Leo's eyes filled with tears, and he looked at the floor, his small shoulders shaking. I don't... Speak up, son, the judge said, not unkindly. Leo's gaze drifted from the floor, past the lawyer, past Jared, and found Ben in the front row. Ben met his gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked at him, a solid, unmoving wall of blue, an anchor. At his feet, Coda let out a soft, almost inaudible whine. Leo saw his dog. He saw his protector. He took a deep, shuddering breath, turned back to the lawyer, and his voice, though still small, was suddenly clear and cold as ice. No, he said. The lawyer faltered. No? What do you mean, no? It wasn't an accident, Leo said, his eyes now locked on Jared. He got mad. He got mad because Maya was crying. He burned me. He said it would make me quiet. He said he'd do it to Maya too, if I didn't shut up. The courtroom went utterly silent. And then he took her breather, her medicine. He said she was faking, and he threw it outside, in the snow, and he locked my mommy in the room. I heard her crying. Leo's voice never wavered. He was just stating the facts. He looked at the judge. I had to go find it, 'cause Maya couldn't breathe, but the snow was too big. Jared's smirk was gone. His face was a mask of purple rage. You little liar, he roared, starting to rise from his chair. I'll kill you. Bailiff, the judge shouted, slamming his gavel. Ben was already moving, standing between Jared's table and the witness stand, his hand on his sidearm. Coda was on his feet, a low, thoracic growl rumbling from his chest. The courtroom exploded. Jared was cuffed, screaming obscenities as he was dragged from the room. It was over. The verdict was a formality. Guilty on all counts. The judge, his face grim, sentenced Jared Haynes to the maximum allowable by law, calling his actions not just criminal, but fundamentally evil. Spring came to Anchorage. The snow, which had seemed like a permanent gray shroud, finally, miraculously, melted. The brown frozen tundra turned a vibrant, impossible green. In a small, sunlit apartment downtown, Serena, now a bright, clear-eyed woman who smiled easily, was packing a lunch. She had a new job as a receptionist at a law firm. In the living room, Maya, now a healthy, laughing toddler, was taking her first wobbly steps. She tottered, fell, and was immediately licked by a large black and white husky. Coda, now officially retired from the APD, had been permanently adopted by the Carter family. A car horn honked. Leo, now 8 years old, and brimming with a new, confident energy, grabbed his backpack. Ben's here, he shouted, running to the door. Ben Carter stood on the sidewalk, out of uniform, wearing jeans and a faded flannel shirt. He had been cleared of all departmental infractions for his unorthodox methods. In fact, he was being given a commendation. He watched Leo run to him, and for the first time he knelt and hugged the boy, without the shadow of the past, without the ghost of his own son. It wasn't a replacement, it was a resurrection. Serena came out, holding Maya's hand. She and Ben just looked at each other, a quiet, comfortable silence between them that spoke of shared trauma and a healing future. "Ready to go?" Ben asked. "Coda needs to run." The final scene was in the park. The grass was green, the sky a brilliant, endless blue. Ben was throwing a ball for Coda, his laughter mixing with Leo's. Serena sat on a blanket, watching Maya toddle through the grass. It was a simple, normal, perfect afternoon. Ben looked at this new family, his family, and at the city, now bursting with life. The ice inside him, the long 5-year winter of his grief, was finally, truly gone. He had found his own sunrise. This story shows us that even in the heart of the most blinding storm, there is a plan. Was it simple coincidence that the one officer haunted by a child's loss in a blizzard was the only one patrolling that forgotten street? Was it just training that made Coda bark at a pile of snow? Or was it a miracle? We believe it was God, moving in ways we cannot always see. He sent Coda, a 4-legged angel, to answer the desperate prayers of a mother and her children. He sent Ben, a man whose own heart was frozen, to be the warmth that would thaw a family. In our own lives, we all face blinding whiteouts, moments of grief, fear, and despair, where we cannot see the path forward. But this story reminds us to have faith. Help is coming. Sometimes that help is a person. Sometimes it's a loyal animal. And sometimes you are the answer to someone else's prayer. Be the Ben in someone's storm. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that hope is never truly lost, please share it. Comment below and tell us, do you believe in miracles? And please, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a story that reminds us of the good in the world. We pray that God blesses you and your family. May He protect all those who are lost in a storm tonight, and may He bless all the viewers watching this video. Amen.